Alice, and I don't expect any non-Greeks around here to remember this. It's a long and rather stupid name anyhow. Um, so yeah, welcome to our Toolkit of Care first Analysis, Theory and Politics of Care event. The first one of this session is called Analysis, Theory and Politics of Care in Electronic Arts. So I will briefly introduce you to the broader context of this project, and then I will give the stage to, I will hand it over to Jenny Pickett, who will talk about the specifics of today's event. I will briefly introduce you to the broader context because this event is part of the Toolkit of Care project. The Toolkit of Care project is funded by European Union. It's a cost-funded project. It will run for the next 4 years. This is the first year that we are actually pursuing this project. We started doing the first activities in January. So it's already a few months that we've been on. And it revolves around the broader topic of care in arts, care in creative practices, and how to tackle certain kind of problems that relate with what we all do. That is doing art, disseminating art, theorizing art, and publishing art. And this pretty much summarizes the 4 main pillars of this project. There are 4 working groups. Working group 1 is about sharing care. That is essentially activities that are meant to share creative practices around. I'll come back into it later on. Then we have I don't remember the exact title, but yeah, it's about producing art, sharing art. Then it's the theory and politics of care in creative practices. And the final group, which is yet, we haven't launched any activity to the moment because of course it comes later on, is about publishing. And the eventual outcome is a toolkit of care. This is why the project is called like this. So what we mainly try to address, and we will talk a little bit about this later today, is the fact that the way that the world is structured at the moment, we don't have equal opportunities for everybody. It's extremely difficult for certain parts of the world and for certain societal groups and for certain groups of people to create or to share their creations around the world. And what we tend to do is to create eventually a self-sustained network. And this is one of the aspects of care we are interested in, a self-sustained network of creative individuals and practitioners, but also theorists and people, NGOs, policymakers, and all sorts of people who are kind of active within the broader cultural field. And so as to bring in touch practitioners and organizations and individuals from, let's say, weaker social status and weaker states and weaker institutional status, to bring them in touch with one another, as well as with, countries and societal groups of a stronger status. But just to say and to make it clear, so just to give you an example, the way that the world is structured at the moment, if Cyprus or Croatia, they lack the possibility of getting, let's say, in direct contact with what happens in, the local creative practices in Colombia or in Indonesia. Of course, you have certain kind of information about all these practices, but you have them most likely mediated through the big centers of the West, or through London or New York or something like that. So this is what we try to change. We believe that there is a lot of knowledge and lots of know-how, lots of important possibilities, and most importantly, lots of different perspectives of how to approach creativity and culture that are produced on a local context. And we believe that this is actually quite important also for those parts of the world that are well connected, and for those parts of the world that are not well connected. And also not just part of the world, but also societal groups, different classes and so on. So what we intend to do is through this project, have some funding for the next 4 years to initiate a number of activities that aim exactly at that, to allow, to give opportunities and possibilities to curate and to organize events, be them for workshops, training school, exhibitions, opportunities to talk and analyze things that can bring in touch people, individuals, organizations, and so on from all those places and broader categories that they normally lack the opportunity, or at least it's not equally easy to come together and present or discuss all these things. So in a nutshell, and in a rather informal way, this is more or less what Toolkit of Care is concerned with. The notion of care is very central, of course, to this. So I welcome you now to this particular event, which is the first, as I said in the start, in the beginning of my brief introduction, is the first opportunity where we want to initiate a more theoretical discussion, okay, in both formal, I guess, and informal ways, a more theoretical discussion about the notion of care, the problems that we all face as organizers, as practitioners, and so on. And, we don't have yet any solutions or conclusions, but we simply initiate this discussion. Eventually, there will be more events to follow, so that eventually we kind of formulate the broader problematics of care. So I will hand over now the microphone to my dear associate, Jenny. Jenny is the vice chair of the entire project and also the organizer of this event. Jenny.
Okay, so for the roundtable, analysis, theory and politics of care, I'm just going to add a little bit to what Marinus has already explained. Care emphasizes the importance, empathy, compassion and responsibility in our relationships we have with others, as well as the environment and technology. This has been thrown into sharp focus since the last COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought care to the forefront, theories that stem from feminist theory from the 1980s, and has been considering the importance of our social connections, the impact of technology on mental health, and how we can better serve our communities, both in the arts and elsewhere. So as a form of creative expression, electronic arts relies, critiques, and hijacks technology. It has the possibility to create more interconnected spaces, immersive experiences, engage the senses and emotions, and raise social, ethical, and political discussions with the public, a lot of which we've seen yesterday also in some of the events, some of the talks in ICEA. I also was quite aware that a lot of artist practices are engaged with care in various contexts, with the environment, or with social connection, or through economy and ecology. So I'm just going to add that in these talks, the guests invited will talk about care from various aspects of this, and I will leave them the floor with Julien for opening this roundtable.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry. We're going to have now a few presentations. And then after these presentations, we're going to open the floor to discussions and roundtable. It's not going to be formalized with the speakers plus the public. It's going to be like everyone at the same level. So we could present ourselves every time we the first time we present ourselves, the first time we speak, sorry. For everyone to know what you're doing, what's your practice, and what's your interest. You could also just be public and just be, I'm here because I'm interested. But if you have something to do with these notions of care, then it's good if you explain who you are and what you're doing. So we're going to have like something like 6 talk. And we're going to start with Mindaugas Kapevicius. That is gonna talk about DIY tools and methods for humans and machine. And then I will present every time the different speakers. We have Maite Kajaravile, Giselle Frosland, Donna Alford Lovell, Amber Schools, Paula Torres Nunes del Prado, she's on her way here. And then we also gonna have probably some other speakers, maybe Andrew Patterson if he feels like it, and Peter Zone, that will add up into the mix. So there's a limit amount of time for each speakers, so I will be clocking, so I might be coming and say 1 minute or 2 minutes, and the questions will come in a round table. Is that all right? Thank you. So, floor is yours. You have to give the HDMI. Oh yeah, I just wanted to say this while he's preparing. We also streaming live, so we're gonna use microphones. We have like wireless microphones, and so please careful of that we actually have people listening to online. So if you decided not to speak in the microphone, they won't hear anything. Thank you. You have one next to you.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Mindaugas Gapševičius, and I represent AltLab from Vilnius, or also Bauhaus University, Weimar. It's a kind of associated partner of our project, bigger project. And yeah, thanks Marinos for a short introduction to what we are gonna do in this project. And I think my position here is to briefly introduce what could be in practical terms our approach to sharing care, or sharing our knowledge, sharing our tools, and sharing our methodologies. And I had some kind of issues a little bit how to call my presentation, and I made it like do-it-yourself tools and methods for humans and machines. We are dealing quite a bit about machines nowadays, and we don't understand any longer what we do or what tools we need for ourselves, or what tools we need for machines, and what tools we need for our living organisms. So therefore, I don't exclude machines out of this context, and if I talk about humans, it is also including our organisms like bacteria, slime mold, dogs, cats, and plants, let's say, and all the other organisms. So I have a project which is called Introduction to Posthuman Aesthetics, and this was a project I started basically my research, my artistic research, where I kind of came up with an idea to produce means of sharing, means of exchange, and these means became tools and methods for artists, and not necessarily artists, could be humans and could be also machines. Here on the screen you see 4 toolkits, altogether 4 toolkits on the left upper corner, and the other toolkits spread in the photos. They all have different tools. I call them accessible tools, do-it-yourself tools. So we don't necessarily need to have industries producing them. These tools were produced by myself, basically, from second-hand materials, or like sometimes electronic parts, and sometimes my creative input. Like, to make a toolkit, you need to have kind of handcrafted stuff. So all these toolkits include different tools to access different themes. And I briefly will go through the themes, and I will show a couple of examples what could be possible to do with these toolkits. So the first toolkit is called My Collaboration with Bacteria for Paper Production. And I have in this toolkit, like in all the toolkits, basically a manual, 20-30 pages manual, and also a video tutorial, which shows how to use the tools. Basically, these toolkits introduce 2, 3, 4 maybe experiments which could be combined together and could also be approached from different perspectives, which became very, very interesting position in these artistic tools. Because when I use the toolkits with other people, people would come up with their own ideas. So experiments which I would introduce in manuals and tutorials, they would be inverted or made it differently. So all the participants of a workshop or people who would use these toolkits, they come up with different ideas. And these toolkits could be used when in like a group, like a workshop setting, or they could also be used in teaching setting. So for example, during pandemics, I was sending the toolkits to the students, and the students would be doing the projects, semester projects. So this toolkit focuses on how to isolate bacteria and how to work with bacteria, so including cooking medium, right? So the first video I have here is how 2 bacteria, isolated bacteria, grows together. So basically they become colonies and they interact with each other. Maybe for a short time I could run and you can try concentrating how they 2 different colonies interact with each other. Maybe you can spot the change, right? So it's a kind of interaction between different organisms in an environment, which becomes very, very interesting. So we humans also interact with other humans, and we need certain space to play in the environment. Another work produced by me in this case, so I was isolating different bacteria, focusing on different scientific papers, understanding what bacteria does for our brains and what we do for the bacteria. So 2 containers with different bacteria. One would be Lactobacillus bulgaricus, I think, and another one would be different bacteria. Streptococcus thermophilus. So both bacteria would be impacting our bodies differently. So imagine if you consume yogurt, the yogurt would have different bacteria, and your part would be isolating different bacteria from this yogurt, growing your own yogurt basically, and consuming it, and understanding, evaluating what impact the bacteria would be doing for your body. So like diet, bacterial diet. Another toolkit I call mycorrhizal network, so how I hack plant conversations. Basically it was a toolkit which has tools to assemble sensors which would be attached to different living organisms, and the sensor itself would become an interface which would be again attached to the computer and controlled by humans. And if you imagine a feedback loop between different organisms and machines, so you can impact with electrical potentials another organism, which would impact another organism through machine again. And conceptually it would ask, perhaps it could also be hacking the sense of living, right? So it's not only using machines for visualizations or sound kind of, but also impacting the growth of the organism. I have here an excerpt with Martin House. We did a performance in the woods of Brandenburg. Maybe couple of seconds I will let play. So one of the examples, a performance in the woods for other living organisms. This was a work with the same toolkit by a student who would attach to different organisms the sensors and would provide a visual image of what is happening within the organism. Maybe I have here a couple of seconds as well. So the upper one is from mushroom and the lower one is from the plant. The first toolkit I was focusing on electricity, and it was approaching electrical signal from the perspective of the organisms and the environment, and this electrical signal could be also used for understanding environment. And this toolkit presents then two different ways to produce electricity and work with electricity. On one hand, it would be our own body, and on the other hand, it would be temperature, the difference in temperature. Also an example, what would happen without use of a battery. And yeah, so basically the tools could be used for doing kind of artwork. In this case, a performance, right, in a collaborative setting. And different people would come up with different ideas how to use the same tools, although the tools are the same, so it is not a scientific experiment in the end, but creative experiment. And I would think of those creative experiments, do-it-yourself creative experiments, as very, very creative. So it is like taking a brush and painting the paper, the painting. In this case, taking more sophisticated tools to work with living matter, basically. So that's cut for my presentation. Thanks.
I've been given 2 minutes to introduce it. So the quick version, Pixel was started in 2003, initially as a workshop for artists and developers that were involved in different video projects on Linux, mainly live video software. And it was just a small group of people that came together to a mailing list and found out we wanted to have gather in Bergen and have a workshop around this. And that was the first Pixel in 2003. And then the next years we focused a lot on software development. Some of the things that came out of it was the Fire plugins for video effects that still exist in the Linux world and is being developed there. But we soon moved on to other topics like open hardware, circuit bending, DIY hardware, instrument building, later also biohacking, open bioart, and that kind of things that has been going on until today, where the focus is very much around computing in general, networking, and security issues, stuff like that. So we just had our 20 years anniversary last November, and this video is from that festival. It was a crew from Spain that came from the Metropolis program in Spain. They made a show from the festival. And we are also involved through the years. We've been involved in a lot of other projects outside of the festival, diverse EU projects, EEA projects, like funded by different institutions, and mainly doing things in collaboration with our network that has been growing a lot through these years. And this is what Maite will be talking a little bit about, a couple of projects that we are involved in. I can mention one project is the Transpixel project that we did for 5 years. I think it was a mini pixel festival, touring pixel festival in South America, and connecting with different local initiatives in the cities we were visiting there.
Okay, well, I'm going to present now 2 projects. One is IDLE, that is a pixel project that we are working since a couple of years, and then I will present a project that is on my personal artistic work. The IDLE project is a laboratory. It's called Inclusive Laboratory for Digital Art and Experimental Art. The idea is to make what we have done well, after the pandemic, but we also have this idea from before. We wanted to unify somehow the virtual gallery with the physical gallery that we have in Bergen. So the idea of doing that was for remote people, for remote artists to be able to perform actually in our gallery in Bergen. After the pandemic times, then we really thought that this is a project that we had to do it because it was very important. We were all stuck. So then what we did was this virtual gallery. Everything is developed in free technologies, of course. So we did the virtual gallery, very similar to our gallery in Bergen, and we started to create a system based on Internet of Things, so that the people can activate or can interfere, can interact in the virtual gallery, and they will be producing an artwork or making a creative environment, let's say, a spatial environment in the gallery in Bergen, and the opposite too. So to do that, we create like a team that is an international team. Part of that is APOD 33, for example. They are working, we are integrating their tool that is called Giasso, that is like a online streaming for internet orchestra. We are integrating here also in the virtual gallery. We are working with a team in Mexico with Malitzin Cortez and Ivan Abreu, that they are very expert on that. And we have ourselves a team expert on Internet of Things in Bergen. So this is a collaborative project that we are creating, and the idea is we have expanded this project to invite people with reduced mobility to being able to play at the virtual gallery, and also to interfere in the physical world. For example, we are thinking like people that has social reduced mobility, maybe because I don't know, they have any social is physically, social, and infrastructure reduced mobility for different reasons. So this is you can see here how we are already integrating all these IoT devices. You can control sound, video, and lights. We are still working on it. It's not finished. 2 minutes only. Okay. We did a first performance, a premiere at the festival, the last year festival. This year, what we are doing is, it's a project of 3 years. The first year was to do the development. The second year is dissemination and working and trying to find the mediators also to help us to co-design events inside of the virtual world. And the third year will be like replicating the model. We are open to other people if they want to integrate this in their organizations. And now I want to talk about the other project. Yes, it's a video there. You have 2 minutes left. Yes, just give me some.
I'll give you 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know. This. Okay.
Sorry for the speakers, it's not personal.
Okay, now I want to present Bextre, that this is a project that I started. I am coming from Extremadura, that is a rural area in Spain. And there is a lot of things are going on in the rural areas now. All of them, unfortunately, is related to extractivism, either mining or solar plants or in macro plants. So it's like for the rural area, now they are having like a tough time because they are getting imposed somehow with the very technological things, but they earn nothing usually, no? It's, everything is coming from outside, and they are taking to outside too. So it's nothing left. So with this project, what I tried somehow to express, what I did was to make like a data mining of the economical factors and social factors, and I did a map and a sculpture that is all based in data. So what you can see by every little town, is how the town is going. Like if it's going well, it's wealthy, or it's depopulating, or it's all data about that. At the beginning, the idea was to make a sculpture, and it was printed in 3D, in ceramic. But at the end, it's like all this data and all this work done. It was a 3D model, so I put it on the internet. This was my first idea. But then the project just was evolving, let's say. I was asking for more things. So at the end, I put it in augmented reality. So the people from Extremadura, because we have to face all the time these very bad terms referring to the rural, like backwards or traditional or stuck people. And then I was thinking like maybe with to identify like to make a new identity, or to help to create a new identity, cultural identity, from the hand of this kind of virtual object that is a little bit like weird, no? So that was the thing. And there is a community coming in. That's a digital community we are doing with this project. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we are gonna have Donna Alpha O-level. I don't buy Nestle, but I use Google. Can you help me? That's the title, no? Oh, okay. I'm good because I read a few times before because I was not sure.
I'm Donna Holford-Lovell, and I've been the director of Neon Digital Arts for the past... Oh, sorry. I've been a director of Neon Digital Arts based in Scotland, in Dundee, for the last 14 years. And I'm also currently just doing a part-time PhD in digital change feminisms, but that'll kind of... it comes out of the work that I've been doing with Neon. Right. Why is it not moving? Oh, there we go. So Neon pretty much was a traditional arts organisation that specialised in digital and technology-driven art. We started to celebrate local and national digital art. Kind of definition of digital and technology is quite broad, so we've worked with different kind of practitioners, from scientists, choreographers, architects, academics, local communities, that kind of thing. And we were quite a traditional organisation where we did a festival, 7 to 5. It was 7 to 5 day, depending on what the year and what the budget was like. Primarily we kind of took over venues in Dundee. Neon Digital Arts has never had its own venue. And so we just kind of worked with different stakeholders across the city, and whether that's with the local swimming pool to do an underwater sound piece, or take over a local car park and turn the car park into a subwoofer. We've commissioned quite a lot of new works from Scotland to Japan. This is Akinori Oishi. Oh no, it's not. It's a Wilder. Sorry, who's another Japanese artist. I'm trying to be really quick and it's panicking me before Julia starts bashing me down. So I'm just going to go through. So yeah, we kind of popped up every year. We've popped up across national, international. We've been invited to IZEA before. We've done IZEA Hong Kong. We've done other festivals across the city and Scotland, and like Fakagazi, and I've visited Pixel and all that kind of stuff, and usually did this kind of mass festival like we're kind of part of now, and then and we've taken over all these spaces across the city. We've taken over shopping centres. We've popped up for a few days, done incredible kind of pieces of work, and it was all great fun for 13 years. And then obviously the shit hit the fan, and we were all told not to go out anymore and we were about to start our 2020 festival. So our organisation's only small. It kind of became very clear that we weren't really ready for this kind of stuff, and we hadn't even thought about this kind of stuff. We hadn't thought about our kind of resilience in this kind of situation, whether that's resources, financial, and even us as people. So our team literally fell apart, and that was kind of financially, resources, and mentally. So over that 2022 period, we had a rejig of everything that we did. So we got rid of the board of trustees because we needed to refresh. We got kind of rid of people that were kind of just showed to be more extractive than actually useful to us, and kind of started to realise that what we were doing as an organisation was quite extractive, and we needed to just chill out and kind of rethink what we were doing. So as an organisation that supports digital and technology, we wanted to kind of look at more of a care approach to internal governance, and as well as how we work and interact with other artists and other practitioners. So we did a kind of bit of a small festival, but kind of it was more of a slow program rather than a kind of 5 days, here's some stuff, take it or leave it type of thing. It was kind of a slow. So we did a round table, we did some discussions, we had open conversations, and then looked at doing smaller commissions. And that's when we started to look at what I called wired women. And we took an approach to look through a kind of feminist lens at care, but feminist lens within the care of technology and digital and artists, etc. And that's when I came across the ecosexuals. So Annie Sprinkle was primarily a porn star, but is now teaching the way of ecosexual. So it's literally having sex with the earth and looking how we can kind of bring that back into our lives. So we kind of looked at pieces of work that were actually examining female internally as in externally and mentally. Going quick. We did. How long have I got? I'm good. Okay. So we also tried with experimenting with online virtual galleries, because again, because we didn't have a venue, it was kind of how do you present art when actually you're very restricted in terms of touch and distance and kind of programmatically how you ticket all that. So we experimented with some online pieces. And as we were looking at all that, we kind of re-examined what our governance was and how our program was and how we can kind of be less extractive and take more care of who we work with. So when we were doing a festival, although we kind of said that we were non-hierarchical, it always became a hierarchical system when it became to commissioning work. So it almost became subconscious. So the person who got the most money got the most time, and therefore those that you interacted with on a kind of smaller budget got less time. And that wasn't what we wanted to do. It just kind of happened. So we kind of said, no, that's not going to happen anymore. And then I'm still at this point, I'm sitting in a converted shed in the back of my garden trying to run a festival, trying to run a program, and I suddenly realised I personally have all these ethical morals. I don't buy Nestle, I'm vegetarian, all those kind of stuff, and I'm sitting there using Google, and it was like, that's a crisis. So I started reaching out to some people I know. I got introduced to Titty Pie, so the Institute for Technology and Public Interest. And I said to them, I emailed them and said, I buy Nestle, but I don't buy Nestle, but I use Google. Can you help me? So we started to devise this plan to look at our organisation and what our digital usage was. And I think, like many places, our primary use is cloud-based, and that's every piece of software that Neon either uses, is forced to use because of funders and interactions with institutions, etc., or it's like a one-off sign-up type thing because you want to access a document or something. So we came up with a counter-cloud action plan. So at the minute it's a kind of contextual plan where we want to step back from the cloud, but kind of in practice, how does that work? So we've been looking at how we can get together and dream up new ways of working against big tech, working with artists that are looking at new ways of, well, they aren't new ways, it's kind of going back to low graphics, just being mindful of kind of how we transfer files and not forwarding all our messages and not saying thanks in an email because, again, that uses too much technology and too much energy. So we're now embarking on a kind of crazy idea where we've taken over. We've actually persuaded someone to let us manage an old indoor shopping market, and we're actually going to try and make that into a kind of feminist digital infrastructure over the top of this market, using the concept of community gardens, because in the kind of like stakeholder council kind of way, you can community gardens are easy to understand. Somebody needs a building, somebody needs data, etc., etc. So our next kind of plan is to look at trying to buy this old building and turn it into a community resource with a mixed trade, creative practice, etc., etc. But Neon will primarily look at the digital infrastructure and how that can be better utilised as a nicer, caring, more ecologically friendly environment. That's it.
Have you got me? You all right there?
Yes.
Have you got me? Have you got me?
Yeah, sorry, Amber, you're ready to go ahead. It's all good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just muting my stream back so we don't get.
I'm mute myself so that we don't have the feedback.
You all right there?
Okay.
Yeah, you have 10 minutes.
And you have 10 minutes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Amber Skees, and I am a composer, performer, musician, performance artist-ish. And oh, sorry, my computer's doing a weird thing. Can you still hear me? Yes, I can hear you. I'm just muting my stream back so we don't get. You all right there?
Are you playing the?
Okay. Hi, I'm Amber Skees, and I am a I don't know if you can hear me. Musician, performance artist-ish. And
Can you hear us?
yeah, I'm here.
Okay, everything seems to be all right. You could go. Sorry.
So I'm going to carry on anyway. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Oh no, I've gone. No, I'm back. What's going on? Okay, great. Jenny's saying you can hear me, so I'll just talk. So I'm a disabled artist, and my PhD has been around working with strategies for creating, composing, performing, improvising, using technology as a disabled artist. Excuse me. And rather than go down the route of looking at assistive technology and specific disabled technologies, I've looked at kind of systems of biopower and looked at how we do things as opposed to what objects we can give you to make things easier. So I guess I come from a social model. So the social model says it's not my body that is the problem, it's the way things are organized that is the problem. Because they're organized by people who don't have the same body as me, they don't think of how I might need it done, so they do it to suit themselves, which then excludes me. So then if you take that social model as your basis, then it's not so much about saying, oh, sorry, I had a big gig a few days ago, I'm shattered, sorry. It's not so much about saying, well, we do it this way, what can we add on to make it easier for you? It's about saying, why do we do it that way in the first place? If that worked, disabled people would be here. The fact that they're not shows that that doesn't work. So how could we redesign what we're doing in terms of like the rules, the space, like whether it's online, how we communicate, how often we rehearse, what the format of those rehearsals is, all of those things, reimagining all of that so that we don't hit the barriers of the social model, which is it's just designed badly. And I don't mean like an object is designed badly like an iPad. I mean like the way we choose to organize ourselves and communicate and run projects. So that's really been like the basis of my work for the last 3 or 4 years. Before the pandemic, I was working with Jenny. We did some live streaming stuff. And then I put together a streaming ensemble for disabled musicians. Excuse me. So we got a bit of funding and got everyone sort of Focusrite Scarletts and a couple of mics and, you know, whatever they needed to get themselves online. And I think this was like a really key part. I suppose that's 2 key parts. I think the first thing is to redesign the project around the people that we're working with. So there's no point going, oh, this works for disabled people. It's like every person is different. And if we work from the basis that we are just a network of different organisms and we all have different needs, then we can have a conversation about that and design a thing that works for the specific people that are involved. Sorry. Rather than importing a structure and then trying to fit people into it, which is like the Foucault biopower system. So we started by interviewing all the people that we were going to be working with, finding out what they needed, finding out where they were at, finding out what the best way to communicate with them is. Some people prefer like vocal communication, some people prefer Zoom, some people prefer email, some people prefer WhatsApp. And it's just about, rather than imposing a system, we work together to work out what the system is. And sometimes we found that different access needs have completely different needs. So for example, in my particular, this is like a personal story which I don't mind sharing. I was working with a guy who had ADHD, and we were collaborating. And because I have a fatigue-based condition as well as some other neurological stuff going on, I need to get into a meeting, do the thing quickly, get to the point, and go back to bed. And his access need is about spending lots and lots of time exploring every single avenue that you could possibly explore before he's able to, or before he's ready to work out what it is he wants to say, which is the exact opposite of what I needed. So in that situation, it's like one access need is sort of cancelling out the other. And we can't say, well, this is the right way to do things, this is the wrong way to do things, because they're both equal. And so we had to find a way of balancing those needs. And in that particular case, we brought in somebody who would be a kind of facilitator and who would work with us both at the beginning of the session and would lay out the kind of foundation and framework of what we wanted to achieve. And then I could go away, that facilitator could work with him to work through all his processes, and then we could come back together at the end and share where we were at. So I think for me, a lot of what I've been doing is about not just seeing access for disabled people as like a bolt-on, but it's about creating a system and a way of doing things that actually doesn't make their life any different and works in the flow of how they work best. And I think that's where we have a lot to offer in the arts, because it's quite often it's not about the bottom line. We're not like, okay, we just need to make a profit, and therefore people who don't make a profit, who are usually disabled people, just can't fit into this box. It's about saying, oh, we want people to do their best work, and what are the circumstances for them to do their best work. And so, like, I'm a really keen gardener, and I quite often use garden metaphors. It's like you don't put a cactus in a pond and then blame the cactus for not flowering. You don't put a water lily in a desert and then be angry at the water lily because it's not flowering. It's like you have to know what that plant needs in order to be its best thing. And I think that's like an approach that we try and take, or I try and take with the disabled projects that I worked with. Excuse me. And then, so that brings me back to the ensemble, where we did like outreach interviews with the disabled people, and we're like, well, you know, what's going to make this work for you? And then once we had everybody's information, we tried to design something as well as processes, but like what tech they needed. And this is, I think, really interesting. Oh, I can see myself on screen yawning. I'm so sorry. I think this is where it's interesting, this whole thing about Google and Zoom. As we were doing this and we were like making our own ways of streaming, the pandemic hit. Oh my word. And we basically had to stop our work because there was lots and lots of streaming applications suddenly hitting the market, lots of non-disabled groups wanting to stream. And everything just started going really, really fast. And that wasn't a speed that we could keep up with. It was like being hit with a tidal wave. So we stopped our project and just waited to see how it would all pan out. We had a gig about 6 months later booked. So we were like, okay, let's stop developing what we're doing and just see what comes out in the wash. And what was really interesting was that there was lots of sort of highly developed music streaming attempts and approaches by people in academia and vice versa. But most of our artists preferred to work with Zoom because they found it more accessible. As much as, you know, we might rally against those big tech companies, having that accessibility, having a program that connected with Otter so that people could have subtitles, something that was really simple that they could just click and use, that they didn't have to learn a whole new operating system. They could have a really cheap computer. They didn't need to have something like that would process their data super, super quick. So lots of the streaming stuff that came out that was like super duper amazing actually didn't suit our group at all. And we took the decision to collaborate using Zoom. And then when we presented it at a conference, we basically had to justify our decision not to use the super duper streaming and to use this kind of corporate thing. And it's like, actually, for our members, this was the easiest option. They didn't have the energy to rebuild their knowledge of streaming. They didn't have the money to like invest in the extra technology that was needed, and they needed something that was integrated with captioning software like Otter. So I think that's a really interesting balance as well. That often the more complicated solutions become difficult for disabled people that maybe have cognitive issues or fatigue conditions, who are like, I simply can't wade through learning all of this in order to just do this one gig. I just don't have the physical or the mental energy or the financial resources needed in order to get there. Can we just use Zoom? So that's kind of like a little bit of an introduction to what I've been doing. I also work with things like body sensors. So I did some projects where I used like EEG sensor. So kind of looking at what happens if I can't perform, because a lot of performing is about you have to be ready on the day. And I can't guarantee that I will be ready on any given day. So it's about, well, what are the strategies if you're working with disabled people? If they say, do you know what, I can't perform today, or I can only perform from home today, or I can be in the, I can't guarantee I can do that particular bit that you've asked me to do. So it's about building in lots of variables, allowing things to flex, and allowing, you know, so like if a clarinet, for example, has a really complicated solo, you have someone in backup to do that solo if the clarinetist is having like cognitive processing issues or like, you know, slowness on that day. Or maybe you just say to the clarinet, whatever you want to play is fine within, you know, this parameter of chord sequences. Or you write that clarinetist 4 different solos of different levels of complexity, so they can choose what they are able to bring on any given day. So for me, that's kind of where I'm coming from, is like creating a model that shifts and moves depending on who's involved and what they need. And it can be quite an amorphous beast, but it's like the opposite of having a structure and then trying to slam people into it and making that work. So yeah, that's me. And thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Do you feel like presenting, or
And then
or you
kind of
join
slam
the
people into it and making
Andrew?
that work.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me. And thank
Sorry, I was. You know. Do you want us? You have a slideshow or something to show you're fine, or? Okay.
which was about 20 odd square meters, which I liked already. It was in a location in Helsinki which is rather, feels like the countryside, even though it's 30 minutes by bicycle to the center. It's surrounded by water. It's a bit like an island. There's only 2 houses on this bit of land. The door into this kitchen studio also, you could see it as you walk along a public path. So the first door that you see would be the one that you can go in. And it was a separate door from the rest of my shared housemates. The artist practice that I have been exploring and developing for about 5-6 years, which another person in the room knows quite well, has been on the sort of theme of kitchen lab and doing experiments in, well, do it yourself, do it with others, food, organic material experiments in a kitchen context, somewhere between bioarts and art science and culinary arts, and then also maybe cultural heritage, etc. So this sort of hybrid practice where a kitchen is actually a very useful space to do experiments or to make things. And in this studio space, and I see that you're not getting a screen, so you just imagine this and you can see later from me. But you can imagine it's a sort of square room. One wall has a kitchen, right? On one wall there's a kitchen of this 20 square meters. The cupboard doors are off, so you can see everything, basically, right? One wall on the opposite side is mostly books. So it's my library over 20 years. And they face each other. And this for me was already an interesting sort of thing. One wall was where had a north-facing window, was where I worked on my computer. And then another wall was like, like little cupboards and stuff with a mirror. So rather self-contained space. But when I reflected upon this, it had everything I needed, actually. It had the academic and practice resources of books. It had the tools, containers, utensils, heating elements to cook with or to make things. And then gradually over time it has all the technical and practical tools to do different types of maker activity. And also, I like to think, at least for half of the year, a rather pleasant place to visit. My neighbor in the other house opposite the path did summer workshops, inviting people to do workshops. So I thought, okay, this is a perfect space for me to do activity. And when the pandemic ended, I decided that this would be a new project where instead of me making cultural events at a large scale in public venues, I would turn a private space into a semi-public one and explore that blurry line and to use the resources that I have already and the resources which are around in the environment to start from. The other thing is that I decided after the experience of Pixelic Festival 2021, which had 8 days of radio, thanks to support of Open Radio Project, Berlin, Helsinki, that I would focus on radio. And of course it's a pleasure even to tell about this over radio, because this sort of radio turn in our contemporary arts and our whatever hybrid arts we do is giving us opportunity to be hyper-local at the same time as, of course, spread our practices and our activities, our stories, our events to some audience elsewhere. And so this became the focal point of explaining. The other thing is that I decided to start this without funding. So even though I almost tripled my rent by taking 2 rooms, and so that allowed me to get housing support from one room, as in the smaller one where I sleep, it meant that I had still like 650 euros per month to find for rent for a kitchen studio. But it does allow me to apply to cultural funds. It does allow me to apply for peer funding, to make short-term residencies, to explore alternative economical models where you maybe take a guest who can do a workshop, there can be a fee, you split the costs, you start to build up and accumulate multiple and various forms of income or revenue through a small, what was previously a private space, now a semi-public one, and in some cases a public venue. It allows you maybe to think about alternative models, not just like mini artist residencies, which make workshops, which is our standard fare, right? But to think of other things, well, could you host ferments like a hotel, or could you find other sort of maker activities which demand that type of space? Of course, culinary arts can be one, but which people might want to care for or look after, or your care of their thing, such as ferment, as an example, it's the most obvious example, is something which you host. In the same way you might host a human in your space, you might do so for other beings and other entities. And that's something I think opens up new or different angles from this sort of well, there are quite a number of examples historically, or at least in the 20, 30 years, of artists turning private rooms in their home into residency projects, and public ones at that, and advertising them in that way. But in our hybrid arts and in our culinary arts or our bio arts, maybe there are things we can do, and that's maybe enough to tell about it. One thing is I started to use Patreon again. I used it a little bit during the pandemic as a way just to get personal support. Mostly it was friends. But now I use it in a way which, well, I have a public info board actually, right? So I live in an area which has got very popular walking, cycling path. And it means there's many passers-by, and I have a little info board, and they can learn about supposedly what's happening in the kitchen. And I have to write, this is not a cafe, it's not a restaurant, it's a kitchen lab, Tarvo's name of place. Of course, it's very confusing for most people who walk past. So I'm curious about how we might work with this hybridity in public space, and especially when you cross the line, not from public venue into one which is sort of feels like private or is actually semi-public, which is what the plan is. So thank you. You have to imagine all of that. There were some pictures, but never mind. One thing to say also, actually a project which is a sort of Hacteria node. So if you're familiar with the Hacteria network of bioarts, biolabs, etc., it's one of these nodes. So it's in a context also that's international. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Zon, you want to have a word also? I think. Yeah? No, it's just.
Can you try to put on our website maybe? I'm Peter Zoran, manager of the European Media Art Platform. I didn't prepare a presentation. Also, I thought it's a bit more like a discussion round table. And I think most of you in the room know or heard about AIM-UP before, so I can spare it. But just for those who didn't, maybe we can see the website emare.eu in the background, where you find all the commissioned artists, the 16 current EU member host organizations. Yeah, exactly. And this is the starting site. Exactly. You can put that. As you see, you find artist works. If you're lucky, then the works are even video documented. But it's always a question of time. So the newest ones are not. And you find 16 members, 100 partners. The news, the events, and if you go to shared knowledge section there's maybe one thing which connects to care. Here we publish relevant information, especially about our online workshops. And if you scroll down a bit, there is one survival guide. Back. This one is actually what I wrote once for audiovisual artists, because I'm specialized. I'm a cultural and a film producer, so my knowledge is how to kind of survive in between the art world but also the film world, especially in Germany, I have to admit, but try to expand it to EU levels. and try to explain all sorts of possibilities, what you can do to survive as an artist working in that field, up to maybe robbing a bank or having a rich marriage or whatever. But then there are all the different funding levels from regional, local, national to EU funding levels, because I deal with that for 30 years now. That's also the reason I'm sitting here, because I have gained some experience with getting funding from Creative Europe. And so my major occupation is to take care that our members keep the condition towards the artists, and that also towards the EU, that everyone fulfills what we applied to, basically. And that brings me to the reason why I might be here, because within our platform we have, since 1 year, discussions going on about fair pay for artists. Oh, shit, no, it's of course vanishing. Wait. And so we collected some informations which might be interesting for you to hear, especially our friend Yanis from Neme, who some of you know. He once made a survey on artist fees in different EU countries. These data are from September 1st, 22, but I think they are kind of really telling about the situation we are in. So it's just a couple of countries, not so many. In the Netherlands, if there is existing work exhibited in a show with 7 or more artists for 1 month, while the annual turnover of the institution who is exhibiting should be around 300,000, the average fee for the artwork is 222, while the average salary in the Netherlands is 3,162. In Ireland, there is a calculator which you can use to calculate the fee you should pay based on the organization's annual turnover, experience level of the artist, and the type of event or opportunity. But still, the average fee is 125 for an artwork, and the average salary in Ireland is 2,647. Switzerland, we are out of the EU, is an average fee seems to be 500 Swiss francs, while the average salary is 5,768. Finland, fees for artists per artwork for museum exhibitions, but they normally do not give it. I don't know what that means. It's an annual turnover of 210,000 euros, and there's a fee of 60 euros. The average income or salary is 2,487. I do 2 or 3 more. Let's go to France because we're here. There is a minimum remuneration in France of 100 euros, but it depends on the size of the group exhibition. Whatever its duration, if the exhibition presents less than 10 artists, a total amount of 1,000 euros per exhibition must be divided by the number of artists. So 500 euros if it's 2 artists, 250 if it's 4 artists, and if it's 10 artists, you end up with only 100, the minimum fee supposed to pay, with an annual turnover of 68,000 euros. The average salary in France is 2,277. Do I bore you already? Maybe the US is also interesting. They have a shows for annual turnover, like size of $150,000, a average fee of $150. If it's a bigger organization with $800,000, the fee might be $243 in average, and the average salary is $3,739. So what we face here is something which is very well known to us in the art world for decades, I would say. In Germany, I think I read the first studies somewhere in the 90s. We had a whole biennale called Real Work on some of these questions, and we were asking isn't there a way to create a basic income for artists. Recently, our union published also some kind of suggestions, the Verdi Union for artists and cultural workers, and they tried to bring it to the level of the public services realm, and they would demand that an artist should be gaining between 50 and 80,000 euros if they're not insured, or if they are insured, we have a special artist insurance in Germany, between 45 and 70,000 euros. So I just would like to comment that this is very unlikely that artists receive this amount. And also including organizers, especially freelancers. I hardly know that amount. Okay, but actually these are just dates which I wanted to share. Last year the Creative Europe assembled us platforms and some other organizations to discuss the issue of fair pay, but also mental health of artists, because they heard that artists are suffering after Corona. I found it strange that they heard it after Corona, because as far as I know, the artists are suffering the last 30 years, which I work in that field, not only after Corona. At the Corona, probably mostly what I heard in the performance section, in the music field, some people committed suicide. Yes, it is a serious problem. And yeah, one information from that was interesting. The only country who has a mental health service for artists, which is free of charge, is Finland, it seems. I never heard about a thing like that. And okay, and now to conclude everything is, and that's quite long, and I need to research it again. I once read about 20 years ago in the German Süddeutsche Zeitung that from 10 euros what the taxpayers pays for culture, so yeah, I mean out of our taxes, just 1 euro ends up at the cultural event. 9 euros are spent on the administration. So if you're an artist, you have to know that you're at the last of the foot line, and you're kind of supporting everyone. It's starting with me as your producer, going up to the culture minister, who might have a salary of, I don't know, 8,000, 12,000 euros a month. Yep, that's about it in Germany. So maybe things should be changed, and maybe we should start to think about that. Thank you. If you're applying to EMAP, you receive 4,000 euros grant for 2 months residency, plus 2,000 euros if you have a collaborator. It might not be on site, but it can be provided by the host organization that they make a connection, or you just bring someone, or so you just collaborate with anyone of your choice, and you have a production budget of 4,000 euros, a travel budget of 1,000 euros, free accommodation and access to the facilities. And we agreed with the members that
until now. I think, and this is the broader speaking, the subject of education, technological education, because essentially today and until now in most universities and in most technical schools, the people who are educated and trained to design the technologies of the future, to shape, the way future iPhones, future laptops, future clothes, future things, will be made. Most interestingly, ethics, aesthetics, ecology, care in general is not part of the curriculum. And this is particularly interesting because essentially, if we are interesting, in the future, where all these things we talk about, are kind of find their way to the everyday life, we are in desperate need of something like that. We need to realize that care is not something abstract. I mean, of course, this is evident in many projects, but it's not something that concerns only the artists. And the right to creativity, the right to be on control, of certain aesthetical values, the right to be able to be responsible regarding the footprint of the technology and the objects we use, about their footprint on the environment, the planet, our fellow human beings, our fellow non-human beings, okay, and so on. This is something that it's absent from the way technologists, architects, designers are educated these days and are trained. And just to add a little bit more noise to this, this is a very serious subject, and of course, there are many people who talk about ecology, who talk about climate crisis, who talk about, gender, societal issues, and so on. But, being an artist myself, and also, I guess, yeah, I don't know, but anyhow, having my own concerns, I think that this further extends. Because it's not just about, of course, these are very serious issues, all of them, but it's also about all these micro issues and micro level that concerns every individual. For instance, I might not want there are people who have obsession with certain objects, with their gardens, with their pets, with all sorts of other things, their old clothes, for certain people it brings memory. So I mean that it's not just the big problems that care people, but in reality, most of the times we care about all sorts of micro, very personal and very intimate things. And currently, the objects we use, the technologies we rely on, and the way that we live our everyday life doesn't seem to bother about all this. On the contrary, we live in a culture that is progressively becoming more and more interesting in how to bulk to create a certain kind of bulk aesthetics, as we see these days, with all the AI technology and so on, because it's much more easier to kind of have a certain globally shared understanding of what we should care about, and to be able to create products that address needs globally, because of course this will open the market to the big tech companies for the entire world. But I think that we should kind of resist this, not just by talking about this, but by actually getting in, the two different things. Starting to think about what we really need, how we really want our everyday life and objects to be in fashions that it's much more closer to our intimate needs and maybe the needs of our closed environments, but also how to educate the next generation so that they take this into mind when they design that kind of technologies.
I was thinking, there's a Gabriela, you did a presentation yesterday about motherhoods and artists, and what you talked, Marinos, is about there's two aspects in it, is our situations and caring about situations and caring about the future. Maybe you have a perspective on those questions, and if you want to present for the people that don't know you and your project.
Thank you.
I helped. I don't know everyone, but
I was just expecting the time to jump in, but thank you for introducing. My name is Graziele Lautenschläger. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Valley Export Center at the Kunstuniversität Linz in Austria. I'm originally from Brazil, and my ongoing research is on the intersections between humanism, technofeminism, and motherhood. And I've been very much influenced by my own experience of while becoming a mother as a media artist, and I was kind of afraid of getting stuck in the household and never be able to be back to the exhibition spaces or residencies and so on. And I'm still struggling to find a way. And I found, but it has been a bit painful, so to say. But I see that there are many lines of the problems. This is very rhizomatic or kind of tumor problem, because it's difficult to kill the problem from the roots, or I don't know how to express this, but when you mentioned all these numbers of how is the income of the artists, I would make a question much previous one, like who there is a very perverse system of how people are selected, or what is considered to be a good artwork, or how people can be able to write well about their ideas, or to which extent can you have the budget to make a prototype, because if you don't apply with something already working rather than an abstract idea of a possible research direction, so you don't get anything. So there is something about this accessibility of, I'm thinking aloud, I didn't prepare anything, just considering all the issues that are kind of satellite issues, or that I think that I don't know how, not even where to start if we want to change the things. We can increase the average, but who is in fact getting from this division at the end? I'm not sure if I'm clear what I'm trying to say, but and also there's this very practical issues. If you are going to a residency, how flexible is the institution? If you have a child, who would assume the childcare, or is there a possibility of creating ateliers that, or studios, or residencies places that are more based on the dynamic of parenting and child, in this level of creation that is much more abstract and very intellectual, conceptual work? What kind of possibilities, methodologies, or tools, or in this direction? I'm still in the very beginning of the research. Till now, I've done other kind of more mapping and going through, so to say, the theoretical background, getting familiarized with the topic, because before that I wasn't in this topic at all. So in this sense, all contributions also that you might have in relation to this topic that I've been studying is very welcome. But I don't know, maybe we could think about kind of brainstorm that we could list what could be practical initiatives to be done in the places where we are acting, to promote the change in the very concrete ways, or whom should we talk with, or I don't know. In this regard, I would also hear from you. I would love to hear from you what you think about. I will share some flyers about my research here. I don't know if you took. Thank you.
You can keep the mics over there. It's fine. Nikos, if you want.
Maybe
after we got some other.
Yeah, I have a question. If I have understand, it's an old-fashioned discussion that has a macro level and social and political level that somehow has to do with the basis and the superstructure. Is a question, just that.
Hang on a minute. What are you talking about? Could you precise being basis and infrastructure? Now you can't just get in and just all question about basis and infrastructure. What do you mean by
superstructure?
What do you mean by that?
It's a.
Come on, develop it, because otherwise it's also let us everyone in
the previous century discussion that, let's say, the way that the societies have been organized, the way that these productions have been organized, somehow is the reason why we have specific decisions. So through these decisions, through this point of view, we create even habits, we create even our taste, everything, and this somehow affects the biases again, and we have this vicious cycle. This is an old-fashioned Marx idea. This is a very old idea. This is the reason not to say that. This is the name of this discussion. The basis and the superstructure. That is. Thank you. This is just a question. I don't want to make a comment more.
Yeah, well, I suppose in a superstructure way, we've turned to our superstructure, which is our funder, which is our core funder, and we can't function without them. But we've turned around and said to them that we're not interested in their system anymore, and this is how we're going to do it. So for answering your question about mothers and spaces for children, spaces, we start from the very beginning and say, what do we want to achieve and who can we achieve that with? And actually look at commissioning somebody, but the basis of the commission is that a public outcome is a desire, not a commitment. It's not a... So if we kind of say we're going to do a public exhibition or we're going to do this, that, and the other, it's not really... It's a wish list as opposed to kind of that has to happen. So you still get paid regardless of what you produce, because that's what we see as a simple process of breaking down that kind of funding system. So we've always kind of got funding based on those kind of erratic kind of measurements of how many people have come through the door, how many more people are you working with, how much more international are you, how many more academic institutions are you working with, blah 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 blah, and it just becomes this immense kind of underfunded infrastructure that is just going to collapse on itself. So we've now said, rather than working with 50 people, we might only work with one person. But that one person happens to have a family, and the family are going to come over, and we're going to talk to the family about the commission, and we're going to work out. And if it becomes public, that's great, but we're not committing to that. So we've tried to kind of flip it back on the funder. And at the moment, the funder, because their shit hit the fan as well as much as ours did, they have to reevaluate how they fund the arts, particularly in Scotland. So I don't know elsewhere. But they happen to be, okay, we can't argue against that at the moment. Let's see how it pans out. So that's kind of one thing that we're trying to do.
May I? Okay, in response to you, we argue with you a lot about the quantity versus the quality criteria in funding. It's a huge discussion because they also ask us about that we want a minimum of 150 artists and so on, and we said no, we are doing productions and we want a certain budget allocated to each production. We want quality, but we really have to defend ourselves, and it's embarrassing. To your point, which is also a very good point, which we discussed about families, mothers, and so on while doing residencies. What we start to advocate towards the EU, and we already started to do that, is that first of all there is options of online residencies, meaning that artists just don't travel anymore. We started that during the pandemic, obviously, successfully, but also had a case, I think last year, where Impact said, okay, they just became mother and family, and so can they stay at home? And I said, yeah, well, let's justify it like that. And we made a pledge that this should be a general rule, like there is no need that an artist needs to travel to another country. But on the other side, I also think I believe in intercultural collaborations and the the value of being in another cultural context. Thirdly, the other thing what you ask, and it connects to your point, is what we try to advocate is a basic, unconditional basic income since 20 years. It was just difficult to find politicians who even want to talk to you about that, because they completely have another idea. They don't believe that this is a solution, and they would come up with how can that be financed and so on. There are enough examples how that can be financed. There are enough examples that it works. And I think that would be our general solution, especially within arts and social sector, but I think in general for the future, I don't see how otherwise it will work out. So that should be the demand, that there is an unconditional basic income.
I can maybe add. I mean, I try to connect a few things here because I return to your statistical points from Finland, right? I mean, I have been operating on unemployment money for quite a long amount of time now, maybe 3 or 4 years. And in that same time, I have been freelancer and member of cooperative. But and I also work in a way which is like open source oriented. So I put my work back to commons, right? But I have this personal philosophy that I'm receiving already universal basic income, right?
How much is that?
Well, it's about 700, 800 euros a month. Okay.
I would think that that's not what I mean, because
I know that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're talking about 1,500, 2,000 euros.
Of course, I live on the edge of what you can live on in Finland. I understand that. But the point is, as soon as the condition of you expected to get a job goes away, because your professional profile is anyway not obviously going to lead towards a job, then you can, and you're at least active in creating your own opportunities, then you can start to think that that money that you get as basic social welfare, which is what I get, is a sort of basic income, because no one is chasing me to get a job. Now, this is working under favorable social political circumstances. A more neoliberal interpretation might push me, right, into doing things on a condition such as the UK model, for example, right, push you into doing things for getting that money. But if they left you alone, then it's as good as, right?
But just to interrupt a little bit here and say that, you know, this is still, I mean, where I come from, it's not a question of having to do or not do things to get the money. You don't get this money. There is no such money. That's it, you know. And this is the reality, like in a big part of the world at the moment.
I understand that,
you know,
yeah.
there is no money for the unemployed, you know, just simple as that, you know. You die of poverty, I don't know, you do something bad. And not just in small countries, you know, even there are big countries that have that issue. So, I mean, I don't know, sorry, I interrupted, I don't know if you're finished.
I'm not finished, but
okay.
But I have lived in Finland for such a long time. But and I very much understand the difference between Nordic context and Southern European context are totally different. I'm just saying that there are some ways to leverage the arguments where some social welfare system exists, but where there is none, then of course you have to argue.
And this is just like what 5% of the world, like it's just Scandinavia, really, you know, and maybe a few other states, but only there. Anyhow, so actually, I would like to.
I think you want
yeah,
to talk. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I also want to talk if there's no one else to answer.
Well, because I'm Greek, in the same time I'm a researcher in Live Institute of Bard College, and all this I have to deal with economy. I have to say something very important, and I will say a short story about Greece. First of all, we know everyone about that the current issue. It is more extreme than climate change, more extreme than the rights, is the income inequality. It's huge, except for the numbers, it's huge. So the opportunities, so the environment, so take into account everything. But I will focus in Greece. In 2009, we have a unique in terms of OECD countries after the Second World War, as you know, crisis in Greece. What does it mean? That in the beginning of this crisis, we have blow of a boom, a real boom of people that talking about rights, have empathy, tries to do things. There was a spirit of common, of community. This is the right word. In the same time, we have also another boom of DIY electronic music in Greece. But until now, if we take into account the basis of the threshold of that you are called poor of 2009, the 41% of Greece are nowadays poor. So nowadays we talk about a country that the right-wing ideas is a common sense. The people have been conservative, they don't have hope. The art somehow goes far away from our everyday life. And of course, this DIY electronic music somehow have died. This is just an example of my country that it's not so good. Thank you.
I add some statistic also, or figures, that the average income in Finland salary is about 3,500 euros a month. And
in
so
Greece is 780.
yeah, to give you, just to make comparisons, right? Yeah. But that, what I'm saying is people who are receiving the basic unemployment money is getting 1/3 of the basic, the average income.
Just to leave on the round table this question or maybe idea again, trying to join in the notes between what you say, what Nico said about the superstructure, if I understand this correctly. What, sorry, I forget the name, I apologize. Cadiera said about, the mothers and all the problems. So I've been thinking, again, I'm thinking aloud now, but I've been thinking that, okay, art and artistic practice in the last century has been through very different stages in the sense that there have been many different paradigms to make art. At some point, probably due to political reasons and, in the fall of the Cold War and all this, essentially move into a society where art is predominantly thought of, understood, and dealt with as a commodity. Okay, so these days, when we refer to art, we mostly refer to, individual practices that end up in a certain kind of commodity, in a certain kind of a product that may generate value and can be sold as service or as an object. I mean, this is most of the art we are familiar with. And I'm thinking that one of the things that has been lost in this process, which it's not just about art, but also about all us artists, and I think it relates a lot with the concept of care. And it's a question. Is there any social imagination, any commonly shared, or many different kinds of shared imaginaries? Because I think I'm missing that. You all talk about our personal stories. And I'm wondering, okay, so other people who are not parents, do they imagine a society or a situation where, artistic practice and motherhood and parenthood in general kind of fit the image? Do we actually, is there any shared space for imagination, where we actually fit our fellow other humans and non-humans and machines, as Miga, said in the start? Do we actually do that? Do we want this? Because I feel that would be quite interesting to discuss at some point, and I guess it also relates with what Nico says in the sense that, okay, given the numbers, from a technical point of view, from a very technical perspective, this superstructure, as you said, I mean, apparently there is some money that circulate the art society, and the academy that relates with this. I mean, there is some money circulated, and as Peter said, most of this money probably end up in administration or in other people than the artists. So anyhow, what I want to lay in this table is this notion of the social imagery, our possibility to imagine, to speculate about a different situation where we are kind of connected not in strictly individualistic, capitalist terms, but in some other different way. And how realistic a different distribution of the available funds and money would that be?
I was going to say there are too many things, to take into account, and it's impossible to solve all these problems relating to care. But I would like to go back to electronic arts, because electronic arts, from the very beginning have been like a peripheral.
I'm sorry, something I would try to say, but if we have you present, it would be good if you say who you are and what you're doing, especially if you're...
I never
said. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm Katerina Guzgiuli. I come from Athens. I'm a curator and researcher. And I recently co-founded a non-profit arts organization working with digital culture and electronic musics in Athens, which is called Vector Athens. But I've been working in the field since 2007, so it's been 15 years now. So I was going to say that, I don't really agree with you, Marinos, that the idea we have about art is this idea. I mean, this community here share another idea of what, art can do and what art is. And I started by saying that the electronic arts, from the very beginning, have been in the peripheral of the discussions. All the contemporary art institutions wouldn't recognize this as art. Even now we have all these issues that can it be considered art, because we don't have an art history, an art theory that includes mediums, practices, that refer to technology and things as such. But I forgot what I was gonna say. So for me, the importance of doing this kind of work in this field is that I'm very happy that there are artists and there is this community of electronic arts is very vibrant, because they do expose things that people usually don't see. So this is a very valuable asset for this community. So for example, we talked before, all of you talked before about advocacy, transparency of data, all these kind of practices that we consider normal, like seeing the bigger picture and seeing, what institutions and more of, let's say, institutionalized structures do. They don't necessarily understand, the things that we say and the things that we think are normal. And I would like to make a very small comment about the social imaginary. I do think that we all share some sort of similar vision in the field of electronic arts, and I don't want to, transfer this vision to the whole world and all these kind of things. So I would want to stay focused in the electronic arts sphere. And, the power of this kind of art to expose all these hidden elements and its capability of talking about difficult issues in a very innovative, I'm going to use this word, way, is very important, and it's something that we should value. And it's something that I think that this is something that we share, our need to talk about these things in public, all these talks about transparency and, our efforts actually to make public all this information about the technology we use daily. So I think this is a shared vision that, that we have here. And I have some other comments, but maybe in another moment.
Okay, I could maybe add on from yourself, Andrew Patterson, if you didn't hear earlier. For me, one of the shared imaginaries that we now have gained over the last 3 years or so, at least for the average person, maybe not those who have previously been stuck at home because of their capacities or abilities or family circumstances or whatever. But anyway, like the space for creativity in the last 3 years, at least facilitated by online networks, has been broadened immensely. And the average person who has been exposed to online performances, shared conversations, any type of streaming practices, has opened up to be a much larger proportion of society than before. And this is an extraordinary new shared imaginary that we have. And for those of us who've been interested in mediated art practices or performances through network culture in the past, all of a sudden you have an audience which you can, you don't have to work with just particularly as a small subgroup of some other one. And I think that's an amazing new space that we have. The other side of it is that many people have found creativity where they are, whether it be at home or wherever they had to stay over a period of half a year or more. And that has, I hope, given us an idea that we can make culture and be creative and do things together in many different types of spaces than we did before. And that's broadened our range. And hopefully some of the examples that we anyway have heard about today already give an example of, well, you can do things differently. You don't have to go back to big festivals, or even any festival. You don't need to work in an art institution or Kunsthalle or whatever. You can make your own wherever you are, because we have this capacity. But one of our challenges is that we have reduced our tools down, and especially those of us who've been advocating for open source software and hardware for a long time, such as Pixel and some other people in this room. I almost feel like we have to teach a whole new generation again these things, just to give capacity back.
Okay. Hi everyone, Dasha Lina. I'm an artist. I'm actually part of the EMF network this year. And I'm also organizing a festival called No School in Nevers, in the Burgundy region in France, in a very small town. And so I also wanted to comment on this discussion, which has kind of started from your comment about art being seen as a commodity, but also about art bringing other things to the table, and also it being an experience and it being able to be shared through various networks and various ways of participation. Because with Maite, yesterday we had a really interesting conversation about organizing events in rural spaces, because both of the festivals that we organize are more or less in rural towns, or specifically the one that you wish to organize would be in a very rural location, and Nevers is also a small town which the population is decreasing every year. Now there's 30,000 people there, so it's really like the center of the city is completely dying, all the shops are closing, which is really sad. But we were talking about how to make this happen, how to bring these kind of events to these spaces where people obviously don't really know what electronic arts are most of the time, and are often really scared by it, and it can be a very sort of exclusive environment. And I was sharing that when I went to the opening of the exhibition at the Cube, which was, I guess, part of the ISEA on Monday, there was a really funny experience, because the opening started at 5, and most of the people who were there directly at 5 were locals from that small town of Garges, which is about an hour away from Paris. And I ended up being part of this guided tour with this group of, 20 locals, most of them in their 60s, 70s, that I'm not sure if they've ever even heard of electronic arts before. And so at first I was really worried, like, oh, I wonder what they're going to think about this. There's a lot of really kind of complex themes that are being discussed, and it's not always clear what people take away from these kinds of experiences. But I think that having moments of mediation like that are extremely important, because it was super nice to see these people. Seeing especially interactive installations, I think, are obviously grab your attention the most in these sorts of moments. Seeing these people interact with something and they don't really understand what the project is about, or they don't know how it works, but just the pure interactivity, I could see people being like, oh, I moved in it and it moved with me, and yes, I noticed, or and so it was, I don't know, for me it was really nice to see that. And I also just wanted to comment that, or maybe also ask a question of what you think different ways of including publics that are outside of the sort of quite small community of electronic arts are. So what are the ways that that you address that accessibility, that care for people from the outside, I guess? You're gonna have to get closer.
Okay. Okay. Well, like following a little bit on this conversation we had yesterday about the rural, how, for example, to make a festival or an event, no, into the rural area, that I think has to do also with this toolkit of care, and how to integrate the people that is outside of our field. Like we were commenting yesterday that maybe to do something that is an interactive piece that maybe is more attracting people, but then after that to surround this with a lot of workshops or a lot of things that people can start to understand a little bit on that. This, for example, is something that how to know be an elite, no? I mean, you invite, I don't know, 10 artists or 20 artists to your little town, and then how to do that the people understand, no? How to make this, how to say, not available, but understandable, no? Somehow. But for example, in another way, like another thing is, for example, for the politics, that this is maybe for Peter a little bit, no? Like how to advocate or how to get the politicians that have to fund your initiative, how to get them involved if you don't make a festival, no? Like if you make, because if you want the, for example, as I was presenting, if you want the electronic artist to work on the field with the problems of the field, in this case the rural, then you need them to be working there. So it has to be, they have to go there and know the problems, know the thing. This is the only way they can somehow be empathic, no, with the situation. So either you do a residency because the funding is short, so either you do a residency or you do a festival. This is like against each other, no? And you can have funding for the first year because they are thinking that you are going to do something fantastic, something electronic art, there's all screens, and then the second year you don't get the funding because they understood that this is something else, no? So all this, how to deal with that.
I remind you that there is an in-between model in between the residency and the festival, which is the camp. And then you decide not to make a festival, but you bring people to the context for a couple of weeks so they understand better what is going on there. And maybe the next year something builds from that. I think we have to be more kind to ourselves also, to not expect so much so fast in new places.
Well, what I do in this context, actually it's part of my practice over many years, is that I kind of try to invite audiences, like everybody really, with some background, probably. I mean, depends on the project. I invite them to be like co-producers through workshops, but also by giving them the opportunity to share the exhibition space with me, and sometimes even without me. So for instance, I develop a prototype, but the actual project is not an exhibition, or a performance of the prototype, is that I invite audiences to create their own prototypes, where I facilitate their own ideas, and then they exhibit their own prototypes rather than my prototype. So essentially, have them be involved in all stages of the production, not just to build something and take it home with me, but also begin with the opportunity of an exhibition. And I think, there are many ways, but I think this is super interesting actually, how to, especially because we're dealing with electronic arts and technology that are not necessarily accessible. And thinking about also what Katerina said, and about what some of the people here stand for, in reality, yes, there are probably are some spaces for common imagery that help in this, like, you have the open source community, you have hacker spaces, you have maker spaces, so there is a certain kind of attitude, towards sharing, open sourcing the artistic métier. Métier is called in France, right? Like the way of do things. But having said that, a very quick comment connected with this situation is that, okay, we obviously, been forced to work with limited resources, most of us, if not all of us. We kind of know how to kind of create our own social spaces and being creative and even happy there. And this is perfectly fine. And personally, I'm not particularly fond of very big festivals anyhow. I much prefer some unique environments, some more informal ways of doing things. But having said that, and also being a little bit of a devil advocate, we are valid parts of society, pay our taxes. And why should we settle with, getting even less and less and less? Why should we be forced always, to find solutions and to work with limited resources, while the very same society that we are a part of very generously distributes these resources to other professions, people and so on. I mean, the COVID is a very nice example. Depending the country, I mean, you have airline companies that are supposed to be, very serious, like big business, and they got massive support from the state. While artists in certain countries, they got nothing. So, I mean, okay, we can obviously work with less and be happy with that, but why should we? It's a deeply political question. Because this also gives the message, to the political system that it's okay, you don't need to cater for us. It's okay, we can live with nothing, We can starve, eat friskies, as a friend would say, and paint with garbage, and do all these nice projects at small spaces for 30 people, while at the same time, you have other kinds of art or services or something, other kind of events, been hosting in big festivals, with international coverage, with lots of money, spending money on all sorts of things, and experimental arts get nothing. Why? I mean, okay, this is how the world is, but I guess that in the context of care, up to a certain extent, isn't our duty not to think of just, how we can solve our problems, which is of course very important, but also how to keep reminding the society that there is a problem, if you know what I mean. Okay. And again, I'm a little bit of a devil advocate here, because yeah, practically speaking, it's very important to do things than talk about things. But having done a few things, shouldn't we go? I mean, you were talking before about how difficult it is, to do things in Scotland and so on. So, it comes to a point, yeah, of course, the state doesn't help, so we do it alone and we self-organize. But there should be a point where we go back to the state somehow in some sort, and you say, something, there is a great injustice here. Because we are part of the society, we pay our taxes, so we produce very interesting, we push the frontier, We push the boundaries of what is possible with certain technologies. We are always on the bleeding edge of what is possible creatively, scientifically even sometimes. And yeah, we get like peanuts and bananas. Sometimes not even that.
Does that. Greece, I refer to the situation of Greece, spent $500,000 for Eurovision this year.
And we are talking about, like $500,000 for Eurovision, and we're talking about, how we can kind of do things in, with 200 euros fees, it's fun. Anyhow.
We've been able to do it a little bit with our funder, which is so we're state funded through our funding organisation. So we've been able to kind of say, no, we're not doing that anymore. Because they're in the kind of same situation, that everything's just falling apart around their ears. We've been lucky to be able to do that. It's a kind of a privileged position to be in, to be able to say, we're actually just slowing down. We're going to have a think about it. We've managed to hold on to 4 jobs, so that's pretty good. And we've decided, instead of doing a festival, we've decided to take over a couple of shops and an unused indoor market and just hang out for 2 years and see what happens. So we produce a very slow program, slow commissions, slow discussions, and because it's not our space, it's the community space, because it's a shopping centre, they're coming to us to go, what are you doing? And then that allows us to kind of have a conversation about what we could be and what we have been and what we might be in the future. So So we kind of, because it's on the high street as well, and the high street's over, capitalism is falling apart, we're kind of saying, look, you know, it's a moment for us to re-look at what the high street could be as well. And that could be driven by arts, and it could be driven by digital and technology arts, because that's obviously where my interests lie. But we also have the same issues in our city. 46% of the children who live in the city live under the poverty line. Many kids don't have laptops. Many kids, yet they're spending millions on a 5G infrastructure that nobody can afford to hook up to, but it's free to connect if you happen to be able to. So we're still fighting those fights around those kind of, but we're doing it through our program and on the high street with the people that come in to shop and kind of say, look, there's a new way of shopping, there's a new way of thinking, maybe. And then that's where we kind of slowly having these conversations. So we've also kind of said we're not filling out their forms anymore. So it's kind of like they give you outcomes of, you know, how much outreach have you done this year? Well, if your program's not fucking reaching anyone, then it's not outreach, as you shouldn't be doing your program's your outreach. What's your equalities, diversity, inclusion policy look like? Well, if you're not fucking including EDI in the first place, then you shouldn't have to write an EDI plan. So we don't have an EDI plan anymore. It's our EDI is our program. How many thousands of people? Well, no, Dundee's not that fucking big. Sorry. It's not that big. Therefore, you know, I should have, you know, it's our interaction, a conversation, a kind of, and I've told them we're efficient enough. We just need to sit and kind of expand a little bit and give people the kind of idea of, you know, what can this future look like? What can these new imaginaries look like? And kind of actually say that technology is not going to save the mess that technology's already made. We need to rethink what we're doing. So we're also connecting with the independent food growers and looking at the food system in our little area and kind of, so we've kind of gone back to looking at ourselves as a little village and kind of what just kind of scrapping it all, trying to start again. But we have that privilege. We're able to do that because we've been able to fight our corner, which I know we're very lucky to be able to do that. And we're very lucky to be able to, over the pandemic, been able to sustain 4 jobs with scraps from, you know, but we're trying.
I just wanted to say really briefly, I don't think capitalism is falling apart. I think it's just being displaced and decentralized, or centralized rather. Because this is what we're seeing in the Ver as well. Like I was saying, the city center is becoming completely empty. Yeah. The shops are, right. Yeah. No, but this was also like the sad part with us is we tried to organize so many things in the hundreds of empty shops that are in the city center. But they're all either run by private companies that are not interested in renting it for a month. It's cheaper for them to just not rent it and leave it empty. Or it's, anyway, it's outside of the city control, so they don't really have a say in it. And all of the shops are outside of the center now, so everyone has to have a car in order to access that, which is also another issue.
Mindaugas Gavševičius. If I may say something, I was thinking while you were talking, we are talking about that years and years and years, but we never talk about kind of solution. And I was thinking in between again, so what solution could be? So I guess the base income is a very interesting solution, right? So base income could provide space to people to make things, and I think making things means creating things, so providing tools, ideas, support, so people would start doing things together in a community. So base income would be a possible solution which is pretty much attractive. But yeah, I think it's too far away for base income, so we have to have something in between probably. And I found a quite interesting solution, unemployment in Germany actually. So if you lose your job, you get like 60% of what you were used to earn, and for whatever, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on how long you have been paying for the system. But when we say if you earn more than, additionally, earn more than €100 a month, you have to declare it, and they would pay next month less. And I found it interesting. So for example, if someone would say, all right, so I need like €800 a month for the next 2 years, and if I will find something in between to earn a little bit more, so I am fine getting also less, but I will keep with like 800 base. And this would create probably additional jobs and probably additional motivation to do something not for money but for community. Yeah, I think could be kind of interesting solution with unemployment German system and base income.
Not so sure, because I mean, right now we have about €400 for the people who don't earn anything, and they are out of the unemployment system. They don't get work, whatever, but they also pay for the accommodation. So, well, it could be that you end up with nearly about €1,000 of things paid for you, plus the €400 you have for your living. Of course, it doesn't really change a lot, but I have to also to say that I know some artists who had been supported by that system for a while, yeah. But I just think that I mean, come on, having to live with €400 is, I think it's kind of embarrassing if you consider that the richer get richer and richer, and the machines are taking over. I don't see a future for work. I mean, things will change, and if we don't start to really think things completely differently over, like machine tax or at least digital taxes and so on, and start to charge the corporations. I mean, I don't understand that Amazon does not need to pay taxes, but making huge turnovers and so on, and that's the point, and that's a mondial discussion where whatever, I mean, not just us, not just the Europeans, but everyone has to kind of convince their governments that they have to take efforts in that case. But it's not the point that it's not financeable to have a basic income of whatever, €1,500 or 2,000 euros, and not just in Germany or not just even in Europe, if you just provide things differently.
Sorry, Nicholas. You want to say something?
Go ahead. Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you. I would like maybe to switch a bit topic back to this more common background about electronic arts and care. So I will speak a bit from outside because I'm in a very special situation, and maybe I'm on thin ice here because my name is Boris Shershenkov. I'm sound artist from Russia. I left 7 months ago, and now I'm in exile basically. And I'm here mostly as a part of DIY electronic music and sound art community, and we used to work for several years in St. Petersburg trying to make this initiatives like this invisible community more visible, because there is no such thing as sound art in Russia, and maybe probably will never be anymore. But it's not funny. I know works of Julien and Mindaugas also because I'm a bit in following Martin Haus and really also working in this concept of psychogeophysics and yeah. So to go back, so I will start maybe to share with the personal experience and then try to go back. Maybe have this question for you all. Because yeah, in Russia, in Russian context before, so I have basically scientific background, but I never I defended my PhD in industrial biotechnology almost 8 years ago, but then I switched to artistic practices because in the contemporary system, I believe maybe it's more or less everywhere, but like if you work. So you have only option to work like in proper job, but even if you work in science, you will have to contribute only or to repressive state or like neoliberal capitalist system. So but art, especially after Soviet experience, like some ways of so-called non-conformist art was basically quite established path of cultural resistance, and for me, basically switch to this very non-stable mode of survival because you can't survive doing art in this type of economy which we had. Was a way to avoid this, to establish new way how to be useful, not for like capitalist system, not be useful for the state, which was always a problem, but to be useful for society. And then, so it's like in Russia, it's we have really big division, but what I probably see here, it's also the same thing, because like these problems of society, they are not something separate from the problems of the state. Yeah, so state deals with its own problems, and but if you go too far, you will get what we get in this sense. And yeah, so the basic intention in art making, especially in electronic art, because electronics always connected with the production, with working with some even DIY practices. It's always you have to have some funding, and like you have to find proper job to fund your own artworks, basically, and contribute to community with. Yeah, so basically you have to have this kind of intention of making artworks, which is not based on economical reasons. So like and that's probably my question of this background of the DIY communities here in Europe. Is it actually the thing, and how it can survive, like on the intention of making art, or is it possible to make art without any institutions and support? And yeah, so is there still like intention to make art and as some kind of social practice, or is it like more already established institutional thing, and like you have to deal with it anyhow? Thank you.
What? Do you want to check? There's anything here. Okay. If you don't, I will. Yeah, I haven't talked for a while, and there's many things very interesting, and in fact, you joining something I wanted to say to you, Nikos, but to everyone, since you do throw marks to us in a very, Greek way, and I wanted to say that it's exactly what we're talking about here, and to throw some of the names, I wanted to bring Foucault and the micropolitics. because and what is behind is the normalization, and also the relations to Marx that didn't think about normalization because he had the idea of having this common. Of course, we could debate. And behind, I also bring another name, which is Derrida, which is deconstructions of the superstructure. And so I think behind all that, the deconstruction of models and superstructure. What we see also with Guattari, you know, is another name. It's just because I like the idea of, you know, answer with Marx. It's just for fun. It's just for fun, Nikos. It's just for fun. But it's just for fun. It's just for fun. No. But what is behind the theory and the names, and just because you throw a big name, you know, is the DIY and all the practice that come from imagination and desire. Is to come back to these ideas. And so what we could find also in artistic practices, in electronic arts especially, is this relations to, okay, there's no money, or there is some money at some moment, but if there's not, and we could hear the different experience, I'm gonna still do it. And this is why it's I'm always admirative, and this is driving me since a long time as artists and curators and organizations, and I come back on this, is to, if you can't do it, by any helps, you will create your own tools, your own toolkit to make it. And this is where it's also social practice. It doesn't mean that you're giving up on trying to get some funding or try to bring public, because we've been testing different size, different levels with our organization in Nantes. From festival to hacking festivals to deconstruct festivals to disappearing festival to different type of models, and that's we tested the bigger public, the grand public, the accessibility for all. It's interesting because you could meet people, but it doesn't mean anything for neither the public, neither the politicians, because you are not doing something popular anyway. So if you don't take the idea that what attracts politicians in the sense is to make it popular, make people happy that they vote for them. So there's this idea of grand public and touching more public. It's very interesting, but it's also a false idea, because we confront it with desire and utopia. Utopia and desire is not always functioning with the idea of popular. And so we have this issue. That's why I was bringing the micropolitics versus, Marx, and it's in relation. So what are you doing when you're hacking, for example, a bigger structure, which we did? You just create a time capsule where people are wondering what are you doing there, and then they grasp something. But the day after, they still want to see the giant spectacle and the big thing. So they don't really care about this. But micropolitics has been changing society since now few decades, as it becomes a concept that were used by the society in general, first by artists and theoreticians that were thinking about, philosophers that were thinking about what is micropolitics, how it could be effective in society in your everyday life. But the time you think about it and you're practicing it and you have an effect on society, it's take 20 years, and so you don't see the effects directly. But now there is something about that is evident that we as artists created ecology and art 20 years ago. We created open source free software tools 20 years ago, blah blah blah. And some other projects about recycling machines, about different issue. And at that time, no one sees why is the interest of this? 20 years after, it became social questions, and now we have cities and politics that start to talk about all those issues, from open data to recycling to many other subjects. But the artists disappeared from this. They took those concepts and said, we have to go that way. But again, we disappeared from those issues. But this micropolitics becomes a political and societal questions and not only to avant-garde theorists and avant-garde artists. And so sometimes you look at what you've done and you look at what you have to do in the education and everything, how you can, and then it's a bit confusing because now big institutions also talk about those subjects, but in their own way to make it popular, to make, so we are also into this paradox and this question of the care. It's that complicated that also carrying the paradox with it. I'm not helping.
I just say a few words. Coming from Greece, I really wish to could agree with you. I say an example about a lot of things, so I really wish. I know this literature, but I cannot agree. Coming from Greece. Coming from Greece, I cannot agree with you. If you are in such a situation, I refer that in the beginning of the crisis, most of the Greeks tries to have a common ideas about the future, how we can DIY organize our lives. We participate in things that has to do with empathy, has to do with collaboration, has to do with communes. We started to have a very interesting, as I say, electronic scenes, but if the situation is such as in Greece, let's say I will refer to GDP. That's okay. I don't like this as a measurement, but we are from the beginning of the crisis minus 25%. This means that our life, I don't agree with GDP, but it is somehow smaller. Our life is smaller, minus 25%. This is huge. This now 10 years. So we are not developed. We have shrink minus 25%. This leads to have no hope anymore. So we started to be fatalist. And step by step, in the middle of social ideas, in the middle, it somehow started to be some right-wing ideas. Nowadays, our government has 3 ministers that there was fans of dictatorship, of the famous Greek junta. And those people are somehow accepted from the whole society. And the whole society somehow accept even fascist. This is totally another thing. And etc., etc. We talk about also that we don't talk anymore about DIY. We talk about tourism. About tourism. And we have artists from abroad and say, oh, what is here? But the situation is not good. And I'm living that situation. So, this micro politics and all these things is very good. I'm really into this. But if the macro politics, it's such a strange, unique, because we are a unique case also in a Western world situation, so it's very hard. And I have to say, for the last thing, that we don't also take into account all the other world. What happened to places like Asia, Africa. Okay, okay, this is good ideas, but this is good ideas from France. Okay, thank you very much.
I just have a quick shot on this, and yes, but no, because we also worked in other countries and include, for example, I have an example with Tunisia. I don't know if you're familiar with Tunisia, but from the DIY experience and the micropolitics, and then people getting organized with the community, making their own tools, developing, they raised issue about their real issue, because there had been also a revolution there, which was not micropolitics, but the issue was the water. And so those micro community that were starting with DIY and all these questions and micropolitics, they suddenly raise the questions to another level of politics, to the government. And so I don't know, it's a question for me.
I just finish with this, then I will not talk anymore about that. But it's very important. If you are in a state of Tunisia, you have the hope for something better. If you are in a state of Greece that you are striking, you lost the hope after 13 years of crisis. This is the issue. It's 13 years of such a situation. Okay, finish.
But I think also like crisis can bring change. So you have to think also of new economic models. And I think this is where actually Greece sometimes is lacking the imagination, the invention of socially innovate and find these models. And also bring economies from other countries and exchange. It's not that we are the country of depression.
I wanted to use the PowerPoint. I have the biggest crisis.
I'm just going to interrupt quickly, and because originally the event was meant to finish around 5, I would like to thank our guests, Peter Zorg, and the others that came along with us that have to go now, and we can continue to discuss.
We're never going to finish this discussion anyway, so we could wrap up now.
And I guess I do a bit of everything. I work with sound. Actually, the paper that I'm going to present in ICEA is about this bio-art research that I've been recently developing. Actually doing these living textiles using the usnea type of lichen, which actually the value of the artworks depend on them being alive, and that requires a lot of care. And then what else? Yes, I am Peruvian, but I've lived in Sweden for the last 10 years almost. So that's it.
Thank you. You made it. That's what matters. Signature. Yes. He's not here. Give it to her.